Hello everyone, this is MC Deck Discussion, and I am Abby Small. So yesterday I was putting together some notes for a video on this card, Strength and Diversity, and as I was doing so, I noticed that somebody else had already put out a video on it. A lot of you are probably familiar with him, Villain Theory, and they have an absolutely fantastic video on this, goes over just how strong this card can be. And so what I decided to do instead, because I was going to talk about 4 heroes, but one of the heroes he didn't cover. So I figured what I would do is I'd throw together kind of a sample deck, and that would fit Strength and Diversity in it, but also other cards from that new hero release, right? So for those who may not know, right, we have there was an announcement for a new hero release for Falcon. And so there are some leadership cards that came from that article. And so one of them is this Strength and Diversity card, but there were some other ones too. So this is going to be part of the build, but I'm going to go in and focus on the other ones. However, I will link Villain Theory's video in my description, so you can always click on that to go to see his. I highly recommend you click on it to truly see how powerful Strength and Diversity can really be, and he does a great job of outlining everything there. So I highly recommend just go check that out. But in any case, let me go to a different card now then. All right, and that card is Flight Squadron. So this is a 2-cost support, and you can play only if the identity has the aerial trait, and it has max 1 team card per player, so notice it's a team card. And so the hero, I think I said this, I can't remember, but I was going to focus on 4 heroes. One of those heroes wasn't covered by Villain Theory, and that was Thor. And so Thor is going to be the deck here, and Thor has the ability to easily acquire Aerial because Thor has his hammer, Mjolnir, and that grants him Aerial. And so when he has that in play, then he then has Aerial, and he can do that quite easily because of his alter ego ability, which I'll go show that in just a little bit. But let's go ahead and read what this card has to say. If each of your allies has the Aerial trait, increase your ally limit by 1. And this card gains this response. After you play an Aerial card, exhaust this card, ready an ally you control. So I think this is really important to notice. Unlike a lot of cards that say after you play, let's say, some kind of ally, this one does not say ally, it says Aerial card. So that means you'll be able to, if you have only Aerial, if all of your allies have the Aerial trait, then you'll be able to use this to ready an ally just from playing an Aerial card. So that would include events. So in this case, let's go ahead and take a look at the deck that I threw together. And I just gave it a generic name, Flight Squadron build, since it's based off of Flight Squadron. And it has 37 cards in it, so it can have room for some other cards. So that includes Flight Squadron that I just shared, as well as that other card, Strength and Diversity. So those are 2 of the cards. And then it currently has, you'll see that it has 7 allies in it, all but one of whom have the Aerial trait. So Adam Warlock, for example, has the Aerial trait. Okay. And the only one that doesn't is Thor's actual identity-specific ally, Lady Sif. So notice she has the Asgard trait, but does not have the Aerial trait. So if Lady Sif ever happens to be in, then you can no longer use the abilities on that team card. Okay? So on that card, Flight Squadron. Okay? So in addition to these, there are 2 other allies that came in Falcon's deck that were leadership allies, and that's Aero and Hugin Munin. So let's go check those out, and then we'll come back to this deck. Oh, first, actually, let's talk about Thor real quickly. So notice Thor's alter ego ability, which is called Worthy, has this action: search your deck and discard pile for the Mjolnir upgrade and add it to your hand, then shuffle your deck. So this is how you'll be able to access Mjolnir at any time you want to, if you're in alter ego form anyway. And of course, that means you can access Mjolnir at the very beginning of the game. So notice it has the Asgard trait, and it's a weapon. It's restricted. and Thor gets +1 ATK and gains the aerial trait. So at that point, then, so as soon as Mjolnir is in play, Thor will have the Asgard, Avenger, and then also the aerial trait. So 3 different traits at that point. And then, so let's go ahead now and take a look at those 2 other allies. So we have, like I said, Aero and Hugin Munin. So here's Aero, who has the aerial trait plus the Agent of Atlas trait, and has 1 thwart and 1 attack, costs 3, and has 3 health, 3 HP. And you can exhaust Aero, choose a player. Until the end of the phase, each aerial character that player controls gains +1 ATK. So you can increase Thor's ATK even further this way, and any other allies that are out that happen to have the aerial trait, which will be every ally except for Sif. And then let's go ahead and look at the other ally. So that's Hugin Munin, who has the aerial, Asgard, and bird trait. So notice, actually, it has aerial, Asgard, and bird. The only new trait here is bird. And it has 1 thwart and 1 attack, 2 life, 2 HP, and has this response: after Hugin Munin enter play, search the top 10 cards of the encounter deck for a minion and put it into play, engage with you, which of course goes along with Thor's ability to, when a minion comes into play, Thor can draw cards. So we'll look at Thor's ability in just a sec. But after you do this, and notice it has the arrow, so it has to have succeeded. So if a minion comes into play, you can ready 1 character you control for each star and amplify icon in that minion's boost area. And minions would always have at least 1 of these, so you'd get to ready at least 1 character. So that does mean that before you play Hugin Munin, you would want to first, do, at least 1, whoever you have out there, your allies and your hero, you would want to do some attacking or thwarting with them ahead of time so that you can be prepared to ready them. So those are the 2 aerial allies. And so now let's look at the gist of the rest of this deck. So in here we have, like I said, all the rest of these are aerial allies. So Adam Warlock is aerial and Mystic. Cannonball is aerial and X-Force. Cloud9 is aerial and Champion. Pixie is aerial and X-Men. Sunspot is aerial and X-Force. And then Vivian is aerial, Android, and Champion. And I just realized I have Pixie in here, and I took out 1 ally that I shouldn't have, which would be 1 more that it doesn't have, aerial, the aerial trait, and that is Professor X, right? So Professor X, for the obvious reasons, would be in there to confuse the villain, but also Professor X leaves right away at the end of the round, so then you don't have to worry about Professor X interfering with the whole flight thing for very long. So that is if you end up using Pixie. And then in addition to that, we actually have some extra aerial cards in here. We have Air Supremacy, just 1 copy of this, so just a one-off. It costs 2. And has the aerial trait and tactic, and has this hero action: choose up to X enemies, where X is equal to the number of aerial characters you control. Then you can deal 3 damage to each chosen enemy. So notice this Air Supremacy card is generally speaking like having more copies of Lightning Strike. So Lightning Strike is a 1-cost card, and you can spend some extra energy resources, and then you do X damage to the villain, and each minion engages with you, and this damage ignores a tough status card if you have the aerial trait. However, Air Supremacy is actually a little bit better because this one costs 1 to begin with, and then you deal X damage. So that X damage is based on the number of energy resources that you spent for it. So you have -1 to those. So if you spend 1 energy resource, this just does 1 damage to everybody for a cost of 2. And then 2 damage for a cost of 3, etc. So it's more effective the more energy resources you spend, but Air Supremacy is actually overall a better card. And in this case, has the added benefit of being an aerial card. In addition to that, we also are including 2 copies of Flying Formation, has the aerial and tactic traits, and it's an alliance card, has this hero action, ready up to 3 aerial characters. So that can be very powerful, adding with those. And we're including 2 copies of the Power of Flight, and which allows you to double the number of resources this card generates while paying for an aerial card. So those aren't aerial cards themselves, but they can help pay for all these aerial cards. And it includes team building exercise because of all the aerial cards. In addition, though, there are a lot of Asgard cards in this deck that just come in Thor's deck, his identity-specific cards that are Asgard cards. So lots of those. So team building exercise is highly effective in this deck. And he has his 2 copies of God of Thunder, which are resource generators, right? Exhaust God of Thunder, hero resource generators, and you can generate energy resources. But just as importantly, it is also Asgard traded, so that means team building exercise is a great use for this. And then when we add to it, we have Hugin Munin have the aerial trait, and so did Aero has the aerial trait. So those are other cards. So all of that makes for a great ability to play all of these different aerial cards and benefit from them and have a lot of synergy going on. But then you can play strength in diversity. So now this is where a person could choose, do I really want to go with this flight emphasis or not? And I would argue that this is still a great way to go, and that strength and diversity, we'll come back to it here in a sec, but strength and diversity is still really strong in my opinion, even though you're somewhat limited on how much damage you can do because all of these have the aerial trait, but they also all have an extra trait in addition. So let's go look at that card again, strength and diversity. So once again, strength and diversity, a hero action, cost of 2 per player. And for each different trait, so let's just assume right now a person's playing solo, right? So 2 cost, right? So for each trait on a friendly character in play, choose either remove 1 threat from a scheme or deal 1 damage to an enemy. So first of all, Thor himself would have 3 whenever Mjolnir is in play, would have 3 different traits. So that means you could remove 1 threat from a scheme and deal 1 damage to an enemy, choosing between them for each of those. So you could mix and match. Or let's just, for argument's sake, say that you choose all 3 of them to remove 3 threat from a scheme, all 3 of them to deal 1 damage to an enemy. So I would argue that even that alone is worth it for this card, even ignoring any allies that aren't in place. And the reason I argue for that is because of a lot of playing that I've done with Mystics, and I think a lot of other people have found this to be true, that when you have Mystics, there's a card called Basic Spell. So let me go show that card real quick. Now, Basic Spell has an added flexibility to it, but here's the gist of it, right? So Basic Spell, 2-cost event, and it has a cost of 2. Play only if your identity has the Mystic trait, and there's a hero action, you're going to choose 1. Heal 3 damage from identity, so that's the extra ability this one has that the other card that we've been talking about doesn't. Okay? Or remove 3 threat from a scheme, or you could choose to deal 3 damage to an enemy. So those who've been playing, because you can only play this if your identity has the Mystic trait. So those of us who've been using this card have recognized that this card is awesome. It's flexibility, even if you ignore the healing of the identity, though of course you wouldn't want to ignore that. So that's important too. But just the removing 3 threat from a scheme and 3 damage to an enemy, to be able to choose to use whichever one you need at the time is very powerful. So even though it seems like that's not very cost effective, it's just, it costs 2 and it only removes 3 threat or only does 3 damage. But that flexibility of just having it on call whenever it's in your hand to do whatever you need it to do turns out to be very powerful. So at a minimum, that other card, other than, it's not as good, it doesn't have the heal 3 damage, but at a minimum, it's at least as effective as the Basic Spell when it comes to the flexibility in removing threat and dealing damage. But as soon as you add another ally into play, at least one of these flying allies, or most of the flying allies anyway, then they immediately make it so it does at least 4 of each of those. And again, it's mix and match with this other card. So again, let's look at that other card. All right, I couldn't remember the name of it. So strength and diversity, right? So it's again for each different trait on friendly characters in play, choose remove one threat from a scheme or deal one damage. So Thor playing it all by himself can do up to a total of 3 of this. So it's at least as effective, at least as far as threat removal and damage are concerned, as that other card. It also, like that other card, doesn't count as an attack or a thwart, so you can use it flexibly to get around, let's say, guards when you're doing damage. But this one, because it's individualized, you could also use it to take out toughs from one or more enemies at the same time. So this card has a lot of flexibility. But as soon as you add in just one other ally, even from one limited in diversity as the deck that I'm using here, it becomes even more effective, right? A minimum of at least of 4 just when you add one ally into play. So let's go look at that deck again. All right, so we can see here, so even if you play Adam Warlock, sure, you don't get an additional identity trait here from Aerial, but you get it from Mystic, right? And the same is true of Cannonball. You get the X-Force trait. Cloud9, you get the Champion trait. Pixie, you get the X-Men trait. Sunspot, you get the X-Force trait. Vivian, you get Android and Champion trait. So from Vivian, that knocks it up to 5 just by adding her in. And then if you add somebody else who's not a champion, then that makes it do 6 damage for just a cost of 2. And again, with a huge amount of flexibility. So I just wanted to share how powerful that deck can be, that card can be, at least in my opinion, just because of its flexibility, but increasing power each time we add another ally with a different trait, that it can become more and more powerful, even if you are focused on a flight deck. However, if you do, so this is where I recommend go to see Villain Theories. Strength and Diversity is amazing. New cards, go see that to just see how powerful it can be. But if you go for more diversity instead of going for a flight, and there are a lot of reasons why, there are lots of powerful Thor decks out there. I highly recommend going to see, let me think of, I'll go find it real fast and I'll show it to you in a sec. But there are lots of great Thor decks out there that have that would have a lot of variety in the allies you have, and therefore more traits to choose from, and you could amp up that damage. So let me go find that deck that I was thinking of real quickly, because I do recommend checking that out. So it's from another content creator. All right, so here it is from Boomguy, so who has his channel, right, Winning Hand. So you can go check him out as well. But here's another example. You could put it into a deck like Blue Christmas and have even some more variety in your allies. All right, so even as one example, we have Beast in here who has Genius and the X-Men trait. So that's 2 extra just from one ally. That's 2 extra. That's 2 extra traits for the ally. So then right away, with just that ally in play, you can do 5 damage with that Strength and Diversity card. And that would be similar for Kid Omega as well, right? So Kid Omega has the Psionic and X-Men trait. So if you have just Kid Omega out, again, right away, that card can deal up to 5 total between damage and thwarting. So just a couple of examples there. And of course, one could build for more diversity in the deck as well, right? This one doesn't actually have a huge amount of diversity, but it's just an example to go, hey, you could do all kinds of build, put that Strength and Diversity card in there, and it could be a highly effective card. We don't know how many copies we'll get of it. I'm guessing 1, because it seems like it's really powerful. And I've noticed that some of the other cards that are like that, what are they called? The Alliance cards. So that are also very powerful like that. They only put out 1 copy of them. So I'm guessing there'll just be 1, but that 1 would be a great one to include in, I would say, the vast majority of decks where you can get any kind of diversity in it. And like I said, even just with 3 different traits, I consider it to be a highly effective card to include. Okay, well, that's it for today. If you enjoy this type of content, please like and subscribe, and please make comments. I really enjoy conversing with people in the comments. All right, have a good one, everybody.